Israel has lost all support in the United States. The war in Iran is profoundly opposed by the American people. None of this matters right now because our government rules by decree.
Today is Monday, August 17th, 2026. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, after a long day, joins us now. Professor Sachs, thank you very much for your time. As always, it is deeply and profoundly appreciated. Before we get to Russian President Putin and NATO, and before we get to your latest public statement, fascinating one, about Dr. Fauci, a couple of sort of spot questions, if I might. Earlier today, Jared Kushner and Benjamin Netanyahu spent time together in Tel Aviv. What do you think they were talking about?
Well, the only thing we heard was a statement, I don't know if it's true, that they agreed on continued Israeli strikes in Gaza. Again, this was just a report of their meeting. Heaven only knows. Kushner is obviously not someone that should be involved in any way in settling the issues in Palestine and Israel, or in the Middle East, or in Ukraine, or anywhere else. This is just shambolic that he is involved in these discussions at all. We are in the most profound amateur hour in our country's history. The American people know it, and the consequences are serious and obvious from the amateurism that we have.
Here's an example of the Netanyahu government. Itamar Ben-Gvir, whom you and I have criticized in the past, he holds a position in the Netanyahu cabinet roughly comparable to the director of the FBI in the United States. Here's what he said over the weekend. Chance cut number 8. What kind of a criminal gang masquerading as a government can get away with this?
Well, this is a genocide that has been underway now since 2023. It is not a hidden genocide. The intent on mass killing, calling human beings animals, saying that there are no innocent people in Gaza, declaring that Gaza should not exist at all, that it should be wiped from the map. These are the ongoing statements of the government of Israel. The American people are in revulsion against this. Of course, Trump continues to back all of this, but what we see in primary election after primary election in recent weeks is that candidates that support Israel in what it's doing are being defeated because the American people are not murderous. They are not fascists. They are not despots. They are not out to wipe other people off the map. Maybe our government is in part, but not the American people. So what we hear from Ben-Gvir or Netanyahu himself or Smotrich or others is utterly repulsive, utterly illegal. The Israeli government has made Israel completely a rogue nation. And it has one backer only in the world, and that is the U.S. government, not the American people, but the U.S. government. And this is a tragedy for first the Palestinians, second for the world, third for Israel itself, which is destroying itself and its place in the world. And it's a disaster for the American people, who understand every day more and more that their government itself is outside of any of the boundaries of public opinion or decency or international law. The U.S. government operates itself without the mandate of the American people.
And there is legislation that Congress is about to pass, which would merge the military and intelligence community of this criminal government with that of the United States in a mandatory merger.
It is shocking beyond belief. All one can say again and again is that the United States government, which is really the military, industrial, digital complex, it's the complex of Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and big oil, and the politicians that they fund. This is a group of narrow, wealthy interests that are pro-war, pro-destruction, pro-mass murder, and against the interests of the American people, who are completely disgusted by all of this, but also know that they bear the costs of all of this. And I think it's worth pointing out that in the Reuters poll that was just released today, Trump's approval rating is at 33%. His disapproval rating is at 64%, essentially twice the approval rating is his disapproval rating. This man does not represent the American people, who are decent. He does not represent the interests of the American people. He is wrecking the economy for the vast majority of Americans. But we are in the hands of a few billionaires in Silicon Valley or in Wall Street or in big oil that push these wars, despite the catastrophic effects that they have for all of the rest of America and, in fact, for the rest of the world. But Israel has lost all support in the United States. The war in Iran is profoundly opposed by the American people. None of this matters right now because our government rules by decree, or our president rules by decree. And this is our grim reality. Maybe the elections in November should change things. We need a Congress that will oppose this lawlessness and recklessness and corrupt catering to very narrow interests. So this is a first hope. But in general, the American political system does not represent the interests or the opinions of the American people.
You and a colleague, a professor of pharmacology at Columbia University, where you are a professor of economics, recently published an open letter to Dr. Anthony Fauci. In a nutshell, what did you say to this man?
Well, we recounted how in private he has heard for 6 years that this virus may well have come out of a laboratory based on research that Fauci and the US government funded. And that in that circumstance, when more than a million Americans died from COVID and more than 7 million on the very conservative count, and perhaps up to 20 million on what are reputable estimates of the fatalities. In those circumstances, Fauci's responsibility as a scientist and as a human being is not to take the fifth, but to say how we get to the bottom of what actually happened. And we point out there is a voluminous information that has been kept secret up until now that could shed decisive light on whether this virus, in fact, was created at the University of North Carolina, which is a very real possibility, because that was the place that was in cooperation with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That is the place that proposed extraordinarily dangerous research, and we can find out if that research was in fact undertaken. There's an article today in the New York Times by Dr. Alina Chan, who is an expert in these matters as well. She has a chart showing that the American intelligence community thinks that this virus came out of a lab. That is pretty dramatic. The FBI and the CIA and many other scientific institutions now hold that as the most likely view. As you and I have discussed, and as we emphasized in our letter that Dr. Harrison and I published this past week, there was a proposal made to the US government, specifically to the Defense Department, to dangerously manipulate viruses of the kind that caused COVID in precisely the way that is observed in the actual virus that caused the epidemic, what's called SARS-CoV-2. SARS-CoV-2 has a genetic signature in it called a furin cleavage site, which has never been observed in any other beta coronavirus of this category. And yet it appeared a few months or a year after a specific proposal to put it in such a virus. And there is reason to believe that that work may well have been done in the United States, the virus created and then sent for testing in a bat colony kept in Wuhan, China, and accidentally released at that colony. The point that I have been making for at least 5 years, and that Professor Harrison and I made in an article published in the Proceedings of the National Academies of Science, PNAS, in 2022, is that the evidence that can ascertain whether this virus was made in American laboratories can be found in the United States by reviewing the laboratory notes, the emails, the other electronic communication of a few specific laboratories which had declared their intention to work in this very, very dangerous way. And this is very straightforward, to look at this information and to provide it to independent investigators. This is not some complicated question. This is evidence that has been hidden from view, that has been deliberately kept from view. Let's look. Maybe there is nothing to see there, but you can't know unless you look. And that's the point that we made. And what Fauci should have done, what he should have done for years, what he should have done from February 1st, 2020, is to say, we need to get to the bottom of this. Did this accidentally arise from research that we supported? Dangerous research that was opposed by much of the scientific community in the United States. And all we have been told is, no, it didn't get done. Well, let's see. Let's check the lab books. Let's understand what actually happened. It's not so hard. And why is it that our intelligence community now believes that this is the most likely explanation, that it came out of a laboratory? Whose laboratory? How? Well, again, this isn't just a mystery that can't be examined. This is rather straightforward to examine all of the activities, the laboratory procedures of the few specific laboratories that are involved in this issue and that were the proponents of a research program that described, at least potentially, how that exact virus could have arisen. So it's not hard to do this. And after 6 years of saying this, by the way, you wonder, why aren't they looking? Why have they hidden all of this from view? Why does Fauci take the Fifth Amendment? It's completely bizarre at this stage that we don't have complete clarity. Open the books and look at what happened.
Switching gears to a statement made over the weekend by Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, whom you know, the foreign minister of Russia, reminding the West that Russia views the introduction of NATO into Ukraine as part of the continuing efforts by the West to dismantle Russia, going back to Napoleon and Hitler and now the Banderists in Ukraine. I don't think the West understands this, and I want you to weigh in on it. In the same answer, is Putin right to fear NATO, or is NATO toothless, Professor Sachs?
Well, let's start 36 years ago. On February 10th, 1990, the German Chancellor Helmut Kohl told President Mikhail Gorbachev that if the Soviet Union would agree to the reunification of Germany, NATO would not take advantage and would not move eastward. And this was a statement made by his foreign minister, Hans-Dietrich Genscher. I knew both of these people, by the way. And it was a statement made on February 7th, 1990 by James Baker III, whom I also knew. The Soviet Union was told, and President Yeltsin of Russia was told, in no uncertain terms, that German reunification would be accompanied by no Eastern movement of NATO whatsoever. This is the starting point, because the Soviet Union and Russia regard NATO as a threat for good reason, because the United States leading strategists, so-called, have said repeatedly that our goal is to weaken or dismantle Russia. And this was spelled out in many, many places, including a book that I regard as one of the most important in 1997 by Zbigniew Brzezinski, called The Grand Chessboard. And the purpose of the book was to explain how America can maintain its so-called primacy in Eurasia, in the supercontinent of Europe and Asia. And the answer Brzezinski gave was that the United States and Europe should move the military and political apparatus eastward and essentially to surround Russia, and that Ukraine was key. We need to take Ukraine, said Brzezinski. By doing so, you make Russia a second or third rate power. And in 1997, Brzezinski also said that the aim and possibility was Russia would break apart into three loosely confederated states, one in Europe, one in Siberia, and one in the Far East. In other words, the aim was essentially to dismantle Russia.
Right.
In 2019, the RAND Corporation issued a study called Extending Russia. The goal, as the RAND Corporation on a government-funded contract explained, was how to weaken Russia. So, yes, Russia is concerned about U.S. missile systems on their border. Russia is concerned about the CIA being all over Ukraine with the intention of disrupting or weakening Russia. Russia is concerned, rightly, about the United States trying to instigate wars on Russia's border. I heard in recent weeks, I won't go into detail here, from a head of state how in 2022, when Russia launched the special military operation, the invasion of the Donbass, that the United States told this other country, you should start a war now at this point because you have land grievances with Russia. And the United States tried to talk this other country into war. This is a U.S. gambit. It's fully understood in Russia because it's not been hidden. If you actually know the people, know the literature, know the statements, know the policy documents, the United States aim since 1990, especially since 1991, since the end of the Soviet Union, has been to weaken or overturn or dismantle Russia. And the eastward expansion of NATO was explained very clearly in the 1990s as something that Russia could not resist, but that could render Russia a second or third or fourth rate power. Now, many Americans might say, well, that's fine, except that it isn't fine when first one has said that precisely German reunification is predicated on not doing that. And second, it's not fine if you are knowingly walking into a prolonged war in which Ukraine becomes the great victim. We are using Ukraine to fight Russia, destroying Ukraine to fight Russia. And this has been going on now for more than 35 years of U.S. strategy. And I have said this repeatedly to the Ukrainians themselves. They are being used, abused, and destroyed. Zbigniew Brzezinski, by the way, whom I also knew personally and rather liked as an individual, though I found the 1997 book to be absolutely shocking. But he actually introduces a term in his 1997 book, geopolitical pivot. Geopolitical pivot, he explains, is a place that doesn't matter to the United States, except it can be used against a U.S. adversary. Ukraine, he labels a geographical pivot. In other words, use Ukraine as a lever to weaken Russia. Ukrainians die? Not our business, not our politics. This is the point. This is very well understood in Russia because it's not a secret. You just have to look. Our newspapers don't get it. The New York Times is like sucking your thumb. It doesn't want to look at anything that goes beneath the superficial statements. But all of this is clearly understandable, explicit, and now more than 35 years in operation. And until today, it's in operation because the United States is still supporting Ukraine to kill itself in this war against Russia with the U.S. intention to weaken or harm Russia. All of it has boomeranged. It's been utterly destructive of Ukraine. It has weakened the United States. It has cost us in all of these wars trillions of dollars. The whole approach that Brzezinski described 29 years ago in his book of aiming for primacy in Eurasia is bleeding us dry right now with the mountain of debt that you and I have discussed many times. But the intention, absolutely clear and explicit, and more than 35 years in existence.
Is there a single significant leader in the West who understands and grasps what you just told us?
Oh, it's a very good question because I know personally, again, leaders who told me this explicitly when they were foreign ministers, for example, but when they become leaders of their country, oh, completely the opposite. And there is in Europe a kind of vassal state mentality. It's shocking to me. Leaders knew about this before. Angela Merkel, who was the German chancellor in 2008, when the United States pushed NATO to commit to expand to Ukraine and to Georgia, knew that this was tantamount to leading to war with Russia, but she was too weak to resist it. She folded her hand. She wrote in her memoirs, yes, whatever explanation we give, from Putin's point of view, this is a declaration of war. She knew that. Other European leaders have known that. They have told me that.
But none has articulated it.
Roberto Fico of Slovakia, who's prime minister today, says it repeatedly. Viktor Orban, who was longtime prime minister of Hungary, said this explicitly. I spoke with many leaders this summer when I took my trip from overland from Rome to China, and I met with leaders all along the way. They know it. But you know what? They don't want hissy fits by Donald Trump. They don't want tariffs suddenly imposed on them. They don't want sanctions suddenly imposed on them. If you go against the United States right now, we have such thugs in office. These people are thugs. They start law proceedings against the families of the leader of Spain, for example, when he objected to the war in Iran. So people do want to keep their heads down.
Right, right. Professor